So as always, let's get started. Get started on time so that we can make sure that we end on time and respect everybody's time. So thanks everybody for being here. Thank you as always for your energies and time on behalf of our schools and our students and staff. Let's get started. Kate, want to do a roll call so that we can make sure we've got our quorum here?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Senator, I see you on this morning. Nice to see you. Delegate Ebersol. Not see you. Okay. Karen Bailey.
Here.
There you are. Dr. Anderson.
Here.
Good to see you, Kelly. Pam Gaddy is not going to be on today. James Bell. Good morning, Coach.
Good morning.
Secretary Padilla.
Good morning.
Good morning. Andrew Tress.
Good morning.
Good morning. John Carrier, are you on this morning? All right, Sheriff Adams.
I am here. Good morning.
Chief Kiefer.
Good morning.
Good morning. Laurel Moody. No. Dave Engel.
Oh, Laurel just popped up.
I saw, good morning, and I saw Delegate Ebersol jump in as well. I see Dave's name. I don't know if his audio is connected.
Good morning.
Morning. Rachel Faulkner. Jay Shri Srinivasan, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. Dr. Hoover. All right. Megan Berger.
Good morning.
Good morning. Dr. Booker.
Good morning.
Good morning. Captain Herring. All right. Tom Alvin.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning, Tom. Manfred. I see your name here. I'm not sure if your audio is connected. Nick Shockney will not be joining us today. And Lee, I see you as well. Good morning.
Morning.
And I believe that is a quorum, although Dawn will confirm.
Yes, you're good.
Thank you, Kate and Dawn. We do have a quorum, correct?
Correct.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Again, thanks everybody. So first business of the day is to review the agenda. It went out ahead of time at the end of last week. If anybody has any additions or recommended changes to the agenda, we'll certainly entertain that at this time. Seeing none, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda as printed?
So moved.
Thank you, Tom.
Second.
Second, thank you, Delegate Ebersol. So with that, if there's no discussion, all those in favor of adopting the agenda, please raise your hand. Fantastic. Thank you all. So we'll move forward with today's agenda. We have two of our board members that are going to be leaving the family. And I just want to say thanks, Jay Shri. You've been a fabulous representative of the students and really moved the student voice forward. And so we're so very appreciative. Big shoes to come next, but we are delighted, so delighted to have had you for the past year, and you've just been a wonderful asset. Similarly, SRO Officer Carrier from Anne Arundel County Anne Arundel County Police Department has been the SRO representative. He's done a fabulous job. I've known him for a number of years as an SRO in our buildings. While he is not leaving the force, he's moving on to another position within Anne Arundel County Police Department. Will no longer be with the School Resource Division. So he will be leaving us as well. So I wanted to say thank you to both of you. And I know I have not seen John join the meeting yet, but Jay Shree, if there's anything you'd like to say to the group, certainly I'd like to give you the time to do that.
Sure, yeah, it's just what I always say and what I'm always thankful for. Being a part of this board in particular has been a different experience from anything I could have imagined, in the sense that the student voice really is held equal at this table, and all of you value and uplift my thoughts and my ideas and allow me to facilitate discussions and debrief. So it's been an amazing opportunity and something that I'll definitely carry with me when I go to college next year.
Fantastic. Jay Shree, have you made a final decision about next year?
Yes, I have. I'll be attending Case Western Reserve University.
Hey, wonderful.
Thank you.
Congratulations. You're fabulous. Thank you. Okay, so with that, if we can talk a little about some of the updates from the center. Kate?
Sure. Dawn's going to kick us off this morning with a quick legislative update from the session.
So I think probably top of mind for everyone was what happened with various proposed pieces of legislation related to SROs, or how the SROs would or would not be used in schools, because there were a number of different proposals floating around. Some of them, trickled off earlier, and some of them made it a little closer to the finish line. But at the end of the day, none of those passed. So there is no change operationally to the SRO programs in the state, bearing in mind that under the Safe to Learn Act, every school system and individual schools within a school system have the choice to determine whether or not to utilize an SRO, or whether to have an adequate coverage plan, or a mix of that, depending on the individual school's needs. So the center had updated its guidelines to schools and local law enforcement departments for consideration of how to implement or how to staff and engage and assess what your school system and schools needs may be. And that, I believe, was the version 2.0, as we say, went out in the fall. And so I anticipate that as schools will look forward to in-person learning again in the fall, as things change and housekeeping takes place over the summer, that's something that everyone will be revisiting and assessing and looking to in terms of how to manage things moving forward. There are some concerns with respect to, let me back up. There was another bill related to removing section 26-101A of the education article, which is the often debated provision that came up during a lot of these school to prison pipeline discussions related to school disturbances. And what does it mean to be a school disturbance? That bill also did not pass. That being said, that has been such a substantial portion of the conversations related to what is discipline, what is criminal conduct. If it's handled as discipline, should that also be criminal conduct? And the debates on that particular bill were, I think, very educational for people who may not have understood what that provision said in the first place, or that it even existed. And to understand that maybe that's something that's better used or deployed for those who are not students who may be disrupting the school operations. And that if it's something that is a student conduct based, like, for example, threats of mass violence, obviously a threat of mass violence to the school also disturbs school operations, but there's another criminal provision that could apply. Right. So, I think that I look forward to probably more analysis related to those issues and figuring out better the balance for what is truly criminal conduct versus what is school discipline. and how best to draw the line. So those were things that did not pass, but that I probably anticipate, and I'm not going to put the delegate or the senator on the spot, but I would anticipate a new flavor next season on those issues. With respect to school-based mental health and the provision of mental health services, there were a number of different bills that did pass that will facilitate the ability to provide telemental health services on school grounds within the school environment. And as we've talked within this group, and as many of the folks on this group have discussed in other fora where I've been present or just on your own, the ability to provide mental health services to students on school premises is a best practice, because then you are ensuring that the students are actually getting the services that they need. It's not always feasible for the school staff themselves as the school counselors to provide those services. So you do need to have those other partnerships with outside providers in order to facilitate that. But I know the National Center for School Mental Health and the National Center for School Psychologists, NASP, yes? NASP, that's the acronym, that they have both strongly recommended that for a long time. So that's a key provision. The other one is the bill that passed that allows students ages 12 and up who have demonstrated by a medical provider to be capable of giving informed consent to mental or behavioral health care to be able to consent to treatment. What that bill does is it does not allow the student to override the parent's choice to say you need mental health care, right? So if the parent has already consented to the treatment and the care, the kid doesn't go, I'm 13 and I know my rights and I'm not doing it. And I use that example because I have two 13-year-olds and I hear a lot about their rights on a regular basis, both perceived and real. So the students can obtain services even if their parents are blocking or otherwise not listening. And again, I found it interesting. The floor debates on that bill were very powerful. My oldest child listened to them and had a lot to say during the floor debates. And I think it was interesting for me to see how strongly teens felt about the ability to be able to do that and to consent. And so we had a household full of 4 kids who were like, that's a great idea. So I think particularly for our LGBTQ students as well, who can't always ask a parent or can't talk to a parent about that, this is an incredible win for them. So those are sort of the bigger highlights of the mental health bills. Obviously, the law enforcement reform bills took a lot of the effort and energy this session and a lot of the attention and time this session. Some portions of those do affect SROs because they affect all law enforcement. I can say that we have had some questions already related to the use of body-worn cameras by SROs and what that means for the school system versus the law enforcement departments. And, school systems can't override a state statute that says that they have to be activated when the law enforcement officer is engaged in law enforcement investigative duties, right? But it's a phased in process. It's not something that all happens immediately. It doesn't apply to all departments immediately. There's a whole system of dates and triggers within that portion of the law enforcement reform bill packages. And we're slowly untangling and going through that, answering questions as they come. So tomorrow I will be sort of giving our SRO community that engages with the center on their monthly call an overview and answering the questions that they may have. So those are sort of the highlights. Does anybody have questions for me, or is there something I did not touch upon that you have a question about? Nope. Okay.
Thank you, Dawn. I would I would add to that last point, or I guess ask, regarding body worn cameras. It's a conversation, for example, we're having here in Anne Arundel County. Our police department will be enacting those. They're going through that process of acquiring and training through the course of this spring and summer, and they'll be active soon. Certainly then active inside the schools next school year.
Mhm.
So is there a thought from the Maryland Center for School Safety about putting some best practices together for the schools to work with our SROs and have those conversations with our local law enforcement?
Yeah, I think the first, so as Dawn mentioned, we have our monthly call with our SROs or SRO supervisors on Thursday. So it's really, we're going to start with what is the need. We also have a call with our the school safety coordinators and security directors of all the school systems tomorrow. And then the SROs, I believe, are Thursday. So it's going to start with a conversation about what the need is and really what would the outcome be. But yes, so those conversations are happening.
And we are, like today, this afternoon, we have a week-long SRO training class, one of our regular training classes. So today was a start date for one of those groups going through the training. So that's something I am going to talk through with them. You know, and again, it's understanding what's law enforcement investigative action versus being in the building, walking through. You know, you don't have to have it on under the new law unless you're engaged in law enforcement investigative activity, right? So it's a very specific time in which you would be turning it on within the school building. It's not just on all the time. And, you know, having them make sure they know and maybe get them to talk through, well, what does that mean to you, right? To understand the different lanes. Same with the school discipline issue. You know, prior to this session, in fact, as soon as we started teaching the SRO course, we've always taught and always gone through the whole, well, what's school discipline and what's law enforcement related, right? And there are times when, of course, I mean, SROs can't give out school discipline. They don't have the ability to suspend or a student or anything like that. So, you know, but there's a question of like, if Johnny's running in the hallway and Johnny's bumping into people with his backpack, with his hoodie up and his, you know, and he's knocking people around and you say, oh, slow up. Should the SRO be required to just stand by and go, well, they said I can't engage in routine school discipline? There's no consequence for it. You're just giving them a reminder. And typically any adult who's going to see that child doing that is going to go, whoa, buddy, stop, slow down. And so I think, you know, there's a particular amount of confusion about what people mean by what is school discipline and do I not have to say, slow down in the hallway, which is more of even when I've been at the school for different things, if I see a kid running in the hallway, I stop them, you know, like it's parental nature. And, you know, I think that we have to find better ways of articulating what that means. And that there's a distinction when you're just trying to help somebody out versus, you know, giving out school discipline. So.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate and knew that you all were trying to get ahead of this process because the schools, of course, the school systems will be asking. So I very much appreciate that. Any questions again for Dawn? Thank you, Dawn, so much for your keeping an eye on things and keeping us updated throughout the legislative session.
Yep, no problem.
Not seeing any hands. So thank you. Craig's going to give us an update on the summer conference.
Yes, thank you so much, and happy Monday morning to all. We are very excited for the conference, which will be taking place, over 4 days in the month of July, and we really encourage you strongly to promote this conference in your social and professional circles. A lot of information about it can be found on our sort of landing page currently for the conference, which is conference2021.safeschoolsmd.org. And that site is actually going to be updated every week from here on out through up to the conference in mid-July with some more exciting details about the diversity of speakers that we will be having present at the conference this year. What I will say is just getting the nuts and bolts out of the way. Our theme this year is resilience through change. Obviously, resilience is what is required of all of us right now as we traverse uncharted territory in the return to school during quasi still pandemic. The actual conference itself will take place July 13th, 15th, 20th, and 22nd. So 2 Tuesdays and Thursdays in a row in mid-July. And while you do have to register for all 4 days, you are in no way required to attend all 4 days, but you will be, when you register, able to actually have those blocked out on your calendar. So should you choose to attend all sessions over the 4 days, you will be able to do so and be alerted to how to actually log in as we get closer. So in the spirit of resilience through change, we've released in just the last week some of 2 of the first speakers that we will be having. We have over 20 speakers actually that will be presenting. And just to give you a little bit more context about these 2 compelling speakers, one is Missy Smith, whose presentation is entitled, "I Choose to Be Happy." She was one of 8 students shot at Heath High School in Kentucky in 1997. And she chose to forgive. And she tells the story of overcoming being paralyzed. Obviously not physically overcoming it, but overcoming it in terms of her success in life and moving forward in a positive way. So resilience is definitely intertwined throughout that entire presentation, which should be very interesting. And we also have a presentation by Robert Lung, who is a judge, about trafficking, trauma, resiliency, and evidence-based hope. And so he'll talk a good deal about sex and human trafficking, topics that are frankly not discussed often enough in the context of school safety. And we should definitely be putting a spotlight on that as we move forward, and so we are. In terms of who is invited, if you have any questions about this, education administrators, teachers, school psychologists, guidance counselors, school resource officers, law enforcement, law and state emergency managers, fusion center analysts, crisis intervention units, counselors and mental health specialists, social workers, teachers, administrators, as I mentioned, school safety professionals, and any other school safety stakeholders. Anyone basically whose role intersects with school safety is encouraged to take part. The vast majority of attendees are going to be from Maryland, but even if you know professionals in other parts of the country who intersect with school safety, they are also invited to take part, and it's free to register at the website that I mentioned just a couple of moments ago. Beyond that, again, we're going to be listing at least 2 new names of speakers every week from here on out, and we really are excited for this year's conference, which I wish I could say I was the big force behind, but we have really an amazing team of professionals at the Maryland Center for School Safety who've worked diligently on this almost on a daily basis over the last 5 months or so. So we're really proud of this, how this fully virtual conference is going to unfurl over the coming days and weeks. And we hope that, again, you all register, because obviously your roles as members of the advisory board intersect with school safety, and you can share this information widely as possible. So that is all I have right now. And again, we'll keep pumping out this message, and I hope you do the same over the coming days and weeks.
Thank you so much, Craig. Any questions for Craig or comments about the upcoming summer conference? Seeing and hearing none. Thank you so much, Craig.
Sure. Have a
Lots of fabulous work. So let's talk a little bit about our breakout work groups discussions that we had. I thank you, each and every one of you, for taking the time to join one of those. I certainly enjoyed the time I spent with my group. Kate, any information with regard to introduction to this, or would you like to jump right in with Megan talking a little about lessons learned?
No, I think we can just jump right in.
Fantastic.
Okay, great. So, I was part of the Safe to Learn Act lessons learned group, and I think we had a really thoughtful conversation. So I'll just share out some of the highlights. So we started out talking about school-based mental health and the center's role with respect to mental and behavioral health services and supports. And I think everybody sort of agreed that this was an area where, there had definitely been some steps forward and, progress made, but there is a lot of room for sort of additional work in this area and additional progress to be made. The group discussed the need to be proactive rather than reactive. We discussed social and emotional learning programs and initiatives, how schools often see it as a responsibility, but handle it in a pro forma fashion rather than tailoring it to the specific needs of the individual school community. One recommendation that came out of that conversation was supporting choice in the process for implementing social and emotional learning in the schools and engaging in strategic design. We discussed how broad the role of the classroom teacher has become and challenges with fitting in all of the content for students while also engaging in social, emotional, behavioral supports. Another recommendation was social and emotional learning needs to be an inherent part of the school culture, from administration all the way down to staff, so that it becomes second nature rather than sort of a standalone objective. We also had a big discussion about the role of the mental health services coordinator, and that the structure of that position is obviously built into the Safe to Learn Act. And so we talked about needing to learn more about how that role is currently being implemented in the local school systems and how that role can be leveraged to actually increase and expand the provision of services to students, and also how to link that position sort of directly to the providers with the expertise in the classrooms, the social workers, the counselors, psychologists. So a recommendation was to have one or two representatives from the mental health service coordinators, and also a representative from the school safety coordinators to come and present to this group about their roles, so that we can learn from them and brainstorm about how those positions can be better leveraged. We had a conversation about pre-bell and post-bell activities as a way to engage students who might not typically be joiners of traditional clubs, as a way to sort of additionally provide social emotional connections. Additional discussion, I think, required with respect to that area, because I think concerns, remained about kids who do join, after school clubs may not be, the kids that need those additional supports in the first place. We discussed trauma-informed interventions and the Handle with Care program. And we made a recommendation to hear from the Handle with Care program about successes and how to improve and better embed in the local school systems, and with the SROs. And then we of course discussed the SRO program. We talked about how obviously there were a lot of concerns raised in this legislative session. There's the movement to remove police from schools, all of the concerns about disparate impact for students with disabilities and students of color. We discussed how it's critical to put seasoned SROs together with new administrators who may not completely understand the role of the SRO, and need to feel confident pushing back against inappropriate demands from administrators. Everyone agreed that SROs shouldn't be involved in routine school discipline, but of course we had a conversation about what Dawn was just referencing, about there's sort of often crossover and a little bit of blurred lines between the Code of Student Conduct behaviors that could trigger discipline under the Code of Student Conduct, and how that could also be viewed as criminal activity under the criminal code. There were questions raised about how to assess whether all school security personnel are actually being trained and how to assess the effectiveness of the training. And we discussed the importance of having the voices of youth who are actually impacted by school-based arrest, and also victims, to talk about their experiences to better understand the impacts. And so this is 4 recommendations that came out of that conversation: was better data collection and assessment to understand the efficacy of the SRO training program, create a focus group to hear both from those students who experience school-based arrest and are charged as juveniles, and also victims. More robust data collection needed in order to assess the full scope of issues resolved without discipline or arrest by effective diversion, de-escalation. And then ultimately the data collection and better analysis, would hopefully allow the program to better address the disparate impact, which is obviously one of the biggest concerns with the program. Feel free to jump in, any of my other group members. And thank you, Dawn, for your notes. They were great.
No problem. No, I think there was one part of the discussion, and I know it's been a couple weeks, but I think it was like toward the end, and we were sort of breaking down the juvenile referrals, right? And that they aren't always from the SRO or from an administrator even, they can come from the victim's parents. And so, whether or not there's an SRO in the school or not, a victim's parents may choose to do that. And that's not something, that's not a right or an ability that the law can take away or restrict. And so it's not clear. And we talked again about data. A lot of what the group talked about was data, and that there wasn't a great way to discern that, or a data collection that shows who referred all the time, like what was the impetus for that. And I don't know if Chief Kiefer wants to comment on that too, because I know he had given some good background on that during the meeting. So I turn it to you.
No, I think you guys covered it pretty well there. It was a really good discussion, and it was very eye-opening to have those different viewpoints within this group, which is what I love being part of this group, is that we kind of come from different backgrounds and look at things differently. But good working group, and I was real proud of what we come up with in that meeting.
Thank you so much. Jayshree, want to share your thoughts and discussion regarding community connections?
Sure. Yeah, I had the pleasure of being a part of the community connection group. And I think the starting point for our discussion is, when you think about community connection, you really have to delve into the nuances of who is a part of the community that we're talking about. And special focus has to be given to underrepresented or underserved groups who we usually forget are part of this community, and we don't necessarily cater to them as well as we could if we gave a little bit more special consideration there. So as far as I know, I think we had some areas of consensus as well as questions raised, but not so much official recommendations that everyone kind of came together to push as recommendations. So the way that our discussion kind of started off was talking about feeder schools and destination schools. So you have students who are on the brink of going out of elementary school as well as middle school. We were talking about how that transition is often a little bit difficult, and I think it's pretty safe to say that that has been especially exacerbated by the pandemic, where students don't necessarily get to tour schools and interact in as much of a dynamic way as they usually would. So we were talking about proactively putting connections in place between these feeder and destination schools so that it would ensure a smoother transition for the students who are moving between them. We were also talking about how, in the midst of making the transition from hybrid and virtual learning to hopefully more in-person learning again, we need to make sure that old habits are kind of being reinstated, both for students and for parents, so that that transition is made smoother as it gradually happens. One big idea that came up, and that was kind of a cornerstone of our discussion, was community schools. And we were talking about how perhaps the advisory board might like to hear a little bit more about community schools and kind of better their understanding on that subject. And one question raised was just to gauge whether there was interest within the advisory board to learn about community schools and maybe have an expert speak on the subject. So perhaps this would be a good time to maybe, if interest could be indicated via chat, just so that those who are taking notes know if there is sufficient interest from the advisory board to pursue that avenue. And I'll pause there for a second. Again, the question raised is whether the advisory board would be interested in hearing from experts who are knowledgeable at community schools. All right, so I see a little bit of interest there, which is to be noted. Another topic that we were talking about was specifically parents who are part of the community and how minority parents often don't have targeted outreach that incentivizes their participation and investment in the school community. And as a result, they kind of remain on the outskirts of it. So we were talking about really pushing more targeted outreach toward these groups so that they will get more involved in the school community. One big idea that was actually pretty interesting was how building supervisors and maintenance staff members are a very integral part of the school community, but they are often underutilized and not treated as a part of the school community because so much of the focus is put towards strengthening the community between the classic members that come to mind that are teachers, administrators, students, and parents. So we really do need to give more special attention to building supervisors and maintenance staff members for all that they do, especially in the midst of this pandemic. And they're really the ones who are ensuring upkeep of our school buildings. A few other questions that were raised for maybe future discussion on this subject. Those were, how can we encourage schools and school systems to harness such individuals, referring to building supervisors and maintenance staff members, talents and experience for the betterment of the entire community? And looking at minority students, how can we encourage non-Asian and non-white students academically as much as these groups who are encouraged to really thrive academically? And then when we were talking about parents and how we can incentivize general parent participation in the school community, Coach Bell really brought up an excellent point about how we have to cater more to parent schedules. So even if they are looped into communication, it cannot be expected that they're always going to show up because oftentimes programming that's scheduled isn't convenient to their schedule if they're working multiple jobs or if they have other circumstances that schools may not be aware of. So schools are the ones who need to be proactive and flexible in their outreach to make sure that as many parents can be brought to the table as possible. Another kind of side idea was that some schools are offering partnerships with community colleges for free and reduced students to really enrich their learning experience. But even then, not as many students are taking advantage of these opportunities, even when they're accessible. So how can we really spread awareness of these opportunities existing at schools and make sure that more students are taking advantage of them? And then kind of wrapping up here, a lot of what was discussed was kind of these complex ideas, but we really talked about how simple actions can also speak volumes. So when there is after school programming, just when an administrator shows up to a sporting event or to a business trip, it means a lot to the students and school community because they see that that event is important and encourages them to show up to that event because the administrator is there and they're there in person promoting it. So how can we really motivate more administrators to show up to these events so that school communities will show up as well? And as we are looking at more dynamic community discussions, it would be nice if the advisory board can incentivize an approach in school system leaders to have discussions that are difficult to have about topics like restorative justice or about school-based mental health, and really involve parents, students, and community members in those discussions so it is an enriching experience for all. So I realize that was a little bit all over the place, but that was the nature of our discussion. And if anyone from the work group has anything to add, that would be a great time in case I missed anything. And thank you, Mr. Meister, for those notes. They were very comprehensive.
Thank you, Jay Shree. Well done. Sounds like a great conversation. And finally, Pam, share a little bit about the lessons learned regarding COVID.
So Pam is not able to be with us today, unfortunately, due to a death in her family, but Kelly has stepped up to lead us in this discussion. And thank you for doing so.
I tried to volunteer you, Dr. Arlotto, but Dawn assured me that I would be the right choice. So.
She really did.
Good thinking.
So we were really looking at impact of COVID and some various things related to COVID. So as you can imagine, we spent a lot of time talking about virtual and technology versus in person. And we had, some discussion about, on the one hand, it was a tremendous lift for school districts to try to get devices in the hands of kids and get to one-to-one, and not a lot of districts are in a one-to-one position already, and shortages and all of that, and internet access, and really trying to make sure that the technology was equitable as part of the pandemic was probably the biggest technology challenge. With that said, we also really identified some benefits that the technology has brought us, including things like really increasing ability to communicate with parents and students. The Google Voice option, if you think of a traditional school mindset, you either email a parent or you leave them the school number and then they call and try to get you. But really being able to text, it's sort of modern times, texting is really a great way of communicating, and having things like Google Voice really allowed us to be able to have a lot more direct and easy contact with families. We also talked about, and I think Coach Bell and Jay Shree, to your point, you were discussing accessibility that families had to different events like parent-teacher conferences, for example, or back to school nights, that kind of a thing, to not have to take a whole hour out of your day or 2 hours or a half a day to drive for a parent-teacher conference that's 10 minutes, to be able to do it virtually. We're really seeing some increase in participation. And so really thinking about moving forward, especially for families, how do we continue to use technology to leverage those ways of connecting while not making it so burdensome on families to have to be able to take the time to drive to go. And as I'm looking at this meeting too, I'm thinking about like how many people have to travel a great distance, or how easy it is to pop on to a virtual meeting for 2 hours at a statewide level. So we really saw some of those things as assets as well. Similar to for students with disabilities in special education, the programming and delivery of service for students with special education needs or 504 needs is challenging in a virtual environment. But again, we saw parent participation in IEP meetings really increasing as a result of the virtual. I think that that's really an unexpected positive consequence that we'd really like to see kind of promoted further. We did have talk about making sure that communication and the challenge of every district experience in terms of trying to communicate current standards and what's changing now, and kind of keeping everyone looped in is a challenge. But there was also some talk about how tutoring and virtual office hours has been advantageous to kids, virtual tutoring and virtual office hours, that even if we've returned in person, would there be a way to do that? And again, that also tags a little bit of an equity piece, because maybe you can't get a ride after school, but you could do a virtual tutoring session with your teacher. And that might be some way to also address some equity issues. And again, same thing, thinking about extracurricular programs. Some are really must-dos in person, but are there ways that kids can participate virtually, so that, again, we're not seeing that disparity between kids who can get rides and kids who can't get rides, and that might be one of the defining reasons why kids are participating or not. Dr. Arlotto talked about the meal distribution and how helpful the meal distribution has been in terms of really keeping people connected, providing a service to families, but also really being able to have engagement with the community in a different way than we might normally. When you think about it, in a traditional world, it's sort of always been you come to the schoolhouse, and the community food process really represented us going into the communities, and that was really seen as beneficial. And the last thing that we really talked about was that one of the things that we've really learned, I think, from the pandemic is that we can't rely on only school people to know what to look for when kids are struggling. and that we really need to make some efforts towards training community members, parents, students, because when we weren't there, we all had worries about what was happening and how kids were doing. So it sort of showed us that if we're the only ones who know what to watch for, the system breaks down when we're not in person. And so really thinking about, like we have the where to report your concerns kind of apps, but do we have enough training around what to report and what the community and students might be looking for, peers might be looking for as an important piece and maybe a role for MCSS in the future. And then we dreamt some big dreams about how we get better communication in the next pandemic from the state and the government, all that good stuff. But other than that, that was pretty much our summary.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. I don't know if anybody else from the group wants to add anything. I think Kelly did a fabulous job.
Thank you to Dawn for her very fabulous note.
Thanks, Dawn. Well done. So thanks everybody for the conversations. Kate, anything, or Dawn, anything to add?
I would like to just jump in. So just as a recap of the three groups, the recommendations that came out from the individual groups were briefings to the advisory board by the mental health coordinators, the school safety coordinators, the Handle with Care program, community schools, and then so those are relatively easy, right? So those are just coordinating a few people to get them in front of you so they can provide you a better understanding of what their roles are in their individual schools. So the two questions that I have for the group, number one relates to data collection. So the first is what additional data would be useful, would be helpful, specifically out of the Safe to Learn Act discussion that Megan mentioned, the training effectiveness, right? So how effective is our security and SRO training? We're already in the process of doing a full revamp of our training. So we're implementing things that we learned over the last year or last couple of years. We're including that in the new training. We're actually expanding our training. It's going to be longer. It's going to have more interactive pieces. But it specifically related to the training itself, what data do you all recommend would be useful for us to look at to be able to determine how effective this SRO and school security employee training is?
Hi, this is Andrew Tress from Juvenile Services. I don't exactly specifically have a surefire recommendation for what data should be collected. However, we were actually reached out to recently regarding data collection and your SRO training, and we shared what we do have. And a couple of years ago, the Department of Juvenile Services, we actually have a spot now in the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Advisory Board. So I would highly recommend, any data collection efforts that you could use from the department be determined at that meeting or be brought up. Because some of the challenges we have with school data is when complaints, as they're called, come in, we don't really have a distinguish between a regular police officer and an SRO in our data collections. That's one barrier. I know we've been working on that in the past, and I don't have a solid update on where we are now, but I just think it's important to keep that in mind because we're relatively still new to that advisory board and longitudinal data system. So I think any data collection efforts that we could help with, we would be happy to, because as an agency, we're all about data, and everybody's kind of moving in that direction with pretty much every decision making. So I just wanted to put that out there.
To the extent that this is helpful, because I don't know that Andrew knows this, but I also counsel the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center. So, that is something that I can assure is something we are collaborating and having a mind to both what can the MLDS do to support other agencies and other entities work and answer policy questions, because that is why that entity was established in the first place. And it's also my understanding with respect to how the data is coded, as you mentioned, that, you know, there are issues, or there can be issues where it is ultimately a law enforcement related referral, but again, it was done at the behest of parents of the victim. And there's not a way to break down in the data collection whether it was because the parents went to law enforcement to request that or not. There is a process for parents to directly do it, but that is not used as much as going to individual departments, and individual departments have different policies or practices with how they handle when a parent comes with that kind of a complaint. So.
Any other suggestions or recommendations?
I just want to, are we surveying the schools themselves, between the teachers and the actual students? Because I know, like, the incident that's being dealt with by SRO is always going to be negative, right? Because it's coming through and people are going to be upset. But I was thinking about our SRO. He does a great job of, after the kid has come back from suspension, of reaching out to the kid, having a conversation with the kid, saying, we shouldn't do that again. So the initial complaint might have came in the week it happened, but then maybe several weeks afterwards, there's a whole different mindset about the SRO and his mindset, because the kid now understands that he was trying to help me out. He was trying to save me from myself. This was necessary. Now we have a positive relationship, and going forward, I respect that. And then you got teachers in the hall that can see the interaction between the SRO and the students to see if they're positive. The times that he's talking to students that nothing's going on, is that a positive conversation? Are they joking? Are they making fun of kids? Are they trying to help out small things? Maybe a kid's lost in the school and the SRO is like, hey, I'll help you out and take you there. Those little small interactions connect the student with the SRO. So I wasn't sure if we were doing that or not.
So the center has not done anything to survey individual schools. I know several of the school systems have put out surveys about the SROs and the experience that students and teachers and parents have with their SRO programs, but it is not something we've done at the state level. All right, so the second one relates to what Kelly was speaking to. So training everyone on behaviors of concern of students, right? So the entire, what we call the whole community of individuals. So my question to this group is, through your lens of school safety, through your individual, within your individual expertise, what would be the right mechanisms to get that something like that out, right? Are we talking about a training? Are we talking about information? Are we talking about PSAs? So I really would like to hear from the group about your comments, recommendations, whether it's public school, non-public school, private schools.
I may have to start deploying the Socratic method if someone does not speak up.
I have a thought, actually. So it's kind of based on something that Emily's been talking about. And we've been talking about doing PSAs with the student focus group in collaboration with members of the advisory board to kind of cover both sides of the spectrum. So when they do go out, they can reach a student audience, but also have the expert verified angle. So I could see that kind of avenue being an effective way to communicate information.
This is Laura Moody here. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. So Jayshree, I agree with your idea. I also think if you're going to do PSAs, that we have the students be the participants in the PSAs. If they're the ones spreading the information, students more likely to listen to their peers than maybe some of the adults in the system, just as a thought.
Sure. So Dr. Hoover, thank you both. Dr. Hoover has asked me to repeat the question just for clarification. So I wasn't specifically asking about PSAs. I was asking, which I think both of those are great examples. What we're looking for is, in addition to PSAs, are there other ways are there other things that we can work to develop that would allow us to train, right, or make aware the whole community of stakeholders within a school system, within a school? How do we engage, how do we engage parents? How do we engage regular community members? How do we engage all of these individuals who see our students every day so that they understand behaviors of concern, not just the educators, not just the SROs?
This is James Bell again. I say one of the things, we have to be willing to leave campus for us and go out to some of these areas. We don't have to go immediately to the actual community themselves. We can go to the parks that surround the communities. I know, like, especially from St. Mary's County, Parks and Recs does a great job of allowing us to come into their parks to host, small events. But I think we have to show that as a school that we're part of that community too. Versus always having them come to our school like they have to. So I think that's the biggest thing, is getting out to the area where it's closer for them to even walk to or even hear us. If we're playing music, it has to be more of an event, and then people be more likely to come and engage with it. And then also they'll get to see the people giving the message in a whole different light. And I think that's the important thing, that they realize that, they're just like me and they have family concerns too. And these are people that I can, I would love for my child to grow up to be like.
So Kate, I'm not sure if this gets at your question, but I put a couple of comments in the chat box. So one, just community conversations co-facilitated by community leaders, maybe with the Center for School Safety. So for example, faith leaders, community organization leaders, student leaders. And then, and again, this may be a bit astray from what you're asking, but, having a kind of increased student well-being check-ins, you may think of them as screenings, but kind of, just perhaps a different way of keeping the pulse on student well-being. There's been a lot of innovation in that area over the COVID period. And so just wondering if we can think more about that.
And Sharon, are you thinking something at the state level? Or are you thinking individual school system?
It would probably have to be individual school systems figuring that out. And I know a lot are. I know Howard County, for example, right now has been thinking through some of that, how to do well-being check-ins that are a bit different from kind of standard mental health screening, where you're looking for, student psychopathology, but really just how can you, with teacher support, be doing well-being check-ins to ensure that we are connecting students who may need some additional support.
And I think Karen had her hand up.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Coach Bell. I think it's probably maybe what we need to do is almost put together best practices. I know in St. Mary's County, our superintendent, our sheriff, and our health officer have, they've formed like their own committee where they get together, once a month and discuss what the needs are that they see in each of their lanes, so to speak, throughout the county, and then how they can come together to address it. We also have, monthly meetings with the NAACP and other groups within the community that see things that are happening that maybe don't get back to the administration of the school or the leadership in the county. So, we can kind of put that on our radar and address it. But I think the schools have to, we have to initiate the outreach, and then we get both the positives and the negatives of what's happening in the community and how the school is interacting with that.
I think the best practice is suggestion makes sense because then it can reach out to the independent schools and the special needs schools and the private schools that don't have the same type of resources that the school systems have.
Yeah, that's an excellent suggestion. Thank you.
And Dr. Booker has her hand up as well.
Good morning. I think that we should just also think about like a differentiated approach because we know that everybody receives information in different places. And so the more ways that we can get it out, whether that's through some town hall meetings in different places, you know, both virtually and in person, whether it's through community organization meetings in different communities, some in-person commercials, whatever we can do, because everybody's listening to something different. So we want to get it in front of as many audiences as possible, whether it's on news radio, some people are listening to public radio, they're different places. So the many different formats and modalities we can put it out, the better response. Some people are just strictly text, even now people are less likely to read emails as opposed to a text or through an app. So we would have to put it out in a variety of ways just to capture the bulk. So it would be a major push out, but the more locations and the more modalities we can use to push out, the better response I think we would get.
Thank you for catching the hands up, Dawn. I can't see them all. Any other hands or any other comments? So I actually think that is a fantastic idea. I guess I'll open up to one other question. Would any of you be interested in participating in a small work group to work on a draft of this over the summer so that we can bring it back to the advisory board in September? Oh, Kelly, I've got you. Lee, excellent.
Karen.
Oh, Karen, I've got you. Anyone else?
Kate, did you get Tom?
Yeah.
Tom Alvin, yep. I got Tom.
Oh, Coach Bell.
Coach Bell.
Yep.
Any of you who are not on camera, if you want to come off mute and tell us you're interested, now is your opportunity.
All right. So just to make sure I didn't miss anybody, I've got Kelly, I've got Lee, I've got Tom, Karen, and James. Did I miss anyone? All right. And Jay Shri, we may reach out to Claire, who I know is replacing you, just so we can ensure we get a student voice on this as well. Great. Thank you. Appreciate the feedback. That's it for us, Dr. Arletto.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks to all. So we are scheduled to meet again on September 13th. Is our next regularly scheduled meeting. Is there anything for the good of the order before we adjourn for the day? Seeing and hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second, Secretary Padilla.
Thank you, Secretary Padilla. All those in favor? Any opposed? Fantastic, folks. We are adjourned. Thank you as always for your time and energies and for the quality conversation and support. Thank you all.